that was the way I was through my entire Air Force career. If there was a spot to get into the action, I wanted to get into it. And obviously there's some ego to that.
In the early hours of the war that followed 9/11, a pilot wants to be among the first to spring into action. But before he can do that, he has to convince his Air Force pilot wife.
Vietnam returnees, people who were in Vietnam, who experienced war, who've had to take somebody else's life. We didn't have a whole battalion of psychologists to talk to when we came back from Vietnam. And we didn't even have each other because the internet had not been invented at that time. We had ourselves.
And in Vietnam, a soldier clings to news of his athlete brother's all-American exploits, only to return to an unwelcoming nation and a devastating realization about one of his heroes, O.J. Simpson. Hello, and welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families, in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. In this podcast, we'll hear from warriors of two different generations, one at the beginning of a war brimming with anticipation, the other home from a conflict that his nation had begun to terribly disapprove of. Cam Torrens, the author of our first story, rose to the rank of colonel after 30 years in the Air Force. Cam was in the first wave of pilots responding to 9/11. Let's listen to A Couch, performed by Dean Knight. Then I'll speak with author Cam Torrens.
It's 2 o'clock in the morning when we finally complete our 6-hour flight from Morocco back to our home base in Germany. I don't have time to be exhausted. Our nation is under attack. New York's Twin Towers are gone, the Pentagon is burning, and no one knows where the crashed plane in Pennsylvania was heading. My head refuses to process the scope of destruction, whether this is an extreme terrorist event or a day which will live in infamy. My boss, Light Colonel Lips Lipinski, greets me on the tarmac with a handshake. Not bad. The headquarters dudes have a bet going that you couldn't get all your folks and planes out of Morocco in a day. What the hell? Where's the love? I'm disappointed. Yes, our C-130s were still flying low level over the Atlas Mountains when we found out about the towers. Yes, we were spread out between two Moroccan bases, expecting another week of joint training. And a final yes, we had to overcome the bureaucratic inertia of a Muslim country, paralyzed by the world's outrage, who couldn't decide if they should prevent us from leaving North Africa or put a boot in our ass to hurry us along. But we're trash haulers. Those staff weenies should have more faith. You still sure you want to go down on the first plane? I can give you 12 hours here and send you down tomorrow night. The advance team can set up ops without you. I'm going. There's no way I'm not going. It's not just the outrage at what's happened back in the U.S., those people in New York, or my brothers and sisters in the Pentagon. It's also this belief that everything I've trained for in the Air Force is pointed toward this moment. A chance to put my training to use, both in the cockpit and leading our airmen. I'm not going to miss out on the start of this conflict because I was too tired from a week-long deployment to Morocco. My commander had explained the two-phase plan over a sat phone before we departed Marrakesh earlier today. Quick turning the 4 C-130s I commanded in Morocco was the fastest way to execute the mission the President has dropped on the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, pull U.S. Marines out of Kosovo, and get them on carriers already steaming for the Middle East. Our planes will stage at a Sigonella Naval Air Station on Sicily and extract the Marines from Pristina, Kosovo. Helicopters at Sigonella will shuttle onto the carrier in the Med. The press claims the White House is still investigating who's behind the attacks, but our mission proves they know something. The carrier is headed east, toward the Suez Canal. I know where we packed everything, I add. These new crews you're swapping in, they don't know how we have it organized. I cringe at my weak argument, but finish it anyway. It'll go quicker if I'm there from the start. My commander smiles as if he knows his question is rhetorical. Well, get your ass home, kiss the fam, get some shut-eye, be back here in 4 hours. We need to be flying missions out of SIG by tomorrow afternoon. I head into the squadron where I stow my gear behind my desk. I plop in the chair and call my wife, Linda, so I don't scare her when I come home a week early in the middle of the night. She's already in bed, but sounds wide awake when she hears my voice. I tell her why I'm home, and she's unsurprised. Everyone knows what has happened. Everyone knows things will be different. But I'm unprepared when she speaks. When I picked up the kids at Frau Petra's, they were watching on TV. Natasha's asking questions. I tried, but you're going to need to talk to her too. I'm going to be leaving before they even wake up, I remind her. I'll have to do it when I get back from this next op. This one's a gut-wrencher. Natasha's only 5, but she's smart as a whip, innocent as a lamb, and it breaks my heart to think she's upset about something a child shouldn't have to understand. No, you just got done doing this. Your squadron has 5 other majors. Tell Lips to pick another deployment commander. I'm silent. There's no way. My stomach ached when Linda told me about Natasha's questions. Now my heart hurts. I met Linda in pilot training, and she's been flying planes as long as I have. She commands the C9 Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron at our base, and the only reason she hasn't been called in to launch her planes is because this event hasn't maimed or killed anyone in Europe. I'm the only one they have who can do what they need to do. It's a lie, and Linda will recognize it. It's the standard line pilots tell their loved ones when they're rationalizing why they would purposely leave their loved ones behind to go do what they love. Let's talk about it when I get to the house. I got 4 hours. I can't bring myself to tell her on the phone that I've already decided. No. She pauses after the word, and I'm unsure whether she means no, she doesn't want to discuss it when I get home, or no, she doesn't believe me about being the only one. Turns out it's none of the above. No, don't come home. If you're leaving again, then just stay at the squadron. You got a sleeping bag in your deployment gear, use it. She hasn't even finished her sentence when I speak. Come on, I've got time to see you. Time to look in on the kids. I'm coming home. Don't. She's holding back tears now. I could hear it in her voice. I'm asking you to please not come home. I don't know what to say. She's right about the 5 other majors. That's why my commander asked me if I was sure. Others could do this, but I want it to be me. And I want Linda to be proud and happy that it's me in the lead. That when the shit hit the fan, her husband stood up and said, I'll go. Instead, she's pissed. Linda, but the phone is disconnected. I pull my sleeping bag from my deployment gear and head for my ops officer's office. He has a hide-a-bed couch in there that saved an aviator or two from a risky drive home after a hard night at the club. I roll out my bag, my nose wrinkling at the stiff mattress smelling of ass, and lean over to turn off the light. I'm down to 3.5 hours until we launch. My stomach churns from the telephone call, and I have no idea how I'm going to get any rest. I turn on my side and take deliberate breaths, in through the nose and out through the mouth, and I sleep.
I'm joined by Cam Torrens, the author of A Couch. Cam, that story is set in the opening hours of 9/11. It's set in the urgency and the scrambling of a nation to respond to that act of aggression against our Twin Towers. Yet what I love about that story is it narrows down to one household, a warrior married to a warrior with a house and a family. And in the midst of so much preparation for what we don't know, but we know we have to respond. And you broke that story down into a man and his wife and a man and his child. Isn't that emblematic of armed service, though? The sacrifices, there's so many in uniform, yet so many that aren't in uniform. Yeah, like this story.
The first time, David, that I sat down to write the story, I thought I was going to be writing something similar to hearing about Pearl Harbor or where you were when Kennedy died, that event. But 9/11, it was like a slow build. You didn't know what was happening because one plane after another. And I realized that the personal impact on me had less to do with when I heard the news and getting those planes out of Morocco, and more about when I got home to my family in between missions. That was the part that hit me as soon as I hit the ground.
I remember when we first took this story up in class, and the universal opinion was that this was a piece about your ego. You remember that?
I do.
And you agreed. Walk us through that.
You join the military, you do a lot of training. I'm a trash hauler, so I haul beans and bullets to places. And action for me is getting them there, on time, on target, when they need them. And when there is an opportunity to do something outside of training, you want to put all that training to use. You don't want to hear stories about your buddies that went off and did it because you were off on leave. And I knew that as soon as we had to get out of Morocco, that was going to be a part of it. But when I heard there was a follow-on mission to get to, I didn't want to miss it. That was the way I was through my entire Air Force career. If there was a spot to get into the action, I wanted to get into it. And obviously there's some ego to that besides a desire to be a professional and use the training you were trained to go do.
Yeah, but the person you tried to sell that to was your wife, who, if I understand, Linda was also a major and also a pilot. This wasn't your typical audience for those lines. She knew exactly what the situation was, and you stuck to your guns anyway.
So she was actually a lieutenant colonel and the commander of her
Oh,
squadron.
my.
I was just working my way up towards the ops officer position. So she was even more experienced than I was. But that was another reason the story was about ego, was because her plane was to pull wounded people out, and we weren't at that stage. There was not much risk that she was going to be sent off to be a part of this right away. So the other part of that ego was that I wanted to be the husband that was off fighting the war in her eyes, So not only did I want to look good amongst my peers, not only did I want to feel good about myself, but I wanted my wife to think I was hot shit as well.
Did she? Let me answer that. No.
She's not too happy with the story either, but it's how I remember it.
Well, I will welcome Linda into the Mighty Pen Project anytime she wants to come write her memoir about you. Talk to me about 9/11, which is the background for this story. Recall for us that first electrifying charge of, is America going back to war right now around me?
So I was the mission commander for 4 C-130s and 100 personnel. And I was between shifts. I was back at the hotel we were staying at when the first plane hit the tower. I thought it was just, a Cessna that got turned around and had a mishap. I've actually flown my own personal plane up the Hudson River back in the days when you were allowed to do that. And I knew that you could fly at an altitude below those towers. But it wasn't until an hour, I don't know what the time limit was, that it was like there was a second hit. And that's when we knew something was happening. And I called out to the runway because I was going to be going in on night shift, and told them to bring the planes back in because I knew something was happening. By the time we got our planes back to the runway, we started getting word on the sat phone of what was going on. We knew we had to figure out how to get out of the country. We were in a Muslim country, and we suspected already at this time that it was a terrorist attack, possibly originating in the Middle East. And so immediately we started figuring out how we could get out of Dodge. The next effort for the next 12 to 16 hours, it was packing everything up. And at my level, talking with the military officials in Morocco to make sure they were going to allow us to fly out. And then that's where the story picked up. I guess I didn't answer your question about how it felt. It didn't feel at that time because I was concerned about my portion of getting everybody out. And I wasn't focusing on what was happening to those people in the towers. I was focusing on what was happening to our country and what we needed to do to play our part in it.
What was your part in the decade and a half that followed of what we call the War on Terror? What was your role?
following 9/11, I actually moved from that squadron to Little Rock, Arkansas, on a 2-year assignment as the commander of a C-130 squadron. And in that 2-year period, I spent 80 days in Little Rock and the entire rest of the time commanding 4 different deployed squadrons in the Middle East. When the war shifted 2003, I was a part of that, and all through the desert until I got out of the flying business and shifted my Air Force career about 2009. So basically from 9/11 to 2009, it was all Middle East most of the time.
Did your rank ever catch up with your wife?
It did. We've got 6 kids, so she retired with 20 years as a lieutenant colonel in 2003, and I stayed in for another 15 years and made colonel. But as we all know, your rank never surpasses your wife.
It don't come in the front door, does it?
That's right.
You were a career Air Force pilot. Your wife's career, your kids grew up with both parents going to war. You don't get a more military family than that. What was that household like, and how did your kids react to it? How did it affect them?
Well, we often thought about how it was going to affect the kids moving every year. I don't come from a particular military family, so they were surprised when I went that direction. We were worried about how it would affect the kids growing up, but it turns out when they became young adults, we've got 4 of them that are out of the house doing the thing. All they want to do is get a job that allows them to go overseas. They miss the travel, they miss the opportunities they had to see the world, and they love it. So I've got a daughter who's in the Air Force. I've got a son who's in armor down in Texas. So it's something that they're used to. They understand it's a privilege to serve. So about half the kids are interested in doing that.
Cam Torrance, thank you for being part of the Mighty Pen. Obviously, thank you for your lengthy service. And this includes your wife and your children. You're part of the Mighty Pen now. I hope you'll stay part of the family for a long time.
David, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity that you're giving to veterans. I've pointed a couple people your direction to join us. It's been not only cathartic for me, but also I'm interested in the writing craft, and you and your team, I feel, have made that better for me, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
It's an honor, Cam. You take care, bro. Now, our second story, OJ, penned by David Aldrich, read by Alan Sater. Afterward, I'll speak with David about his efforts over 50 years to cope.
During the football season of 1967, most of my infantry company in Vietnam followed the University of Southern California football team schedule almost as if they had all grown up in the shadow of the Coliseum in Los Angeles. Most of us rooted for the Trojans no matter who they played. My fellow soldiers in the company had become rabid fans of the Trojans, all because my brother was playing on the team. We couldn't wait for the next Stars and Stripes newspaper to come to us out in the field to see if there was anything in there about USC, or specifically about my brother. I remember mail call on Operation Shenandoah 2, where it didn't matter if anyone got any mail as long as we received a Stars and Stripes newspaper and could read the latest college football scores. As the season progressed, USC, my brother's football team, became more and more the topic of conversation when we were out on ambush or doing cloverleafs in the triple canopy jungles of War Zone C and D. Coming in from a day-long search and destroy mission, we met another platoon of guys who wanted to know how USC had done against Washington State. They crushed them, 49-0, I yelled back at them. They hooted and hollered their approval. A week later, in the middle of a continuous monsoon rain, soaked to the bone with the unending deluge and miserable with immersion foot from 5 days of being in calf-deep mud and water, guys hollered out at me as they went out on ambush. "Hey, Aldridge, how'd your brother do against Texas?" I answered, "They beat him 17-13. My brother got a field goal, 2 extra points. You believe that shit?" On it went through the season. No matter how miserable everyone was, they were cheered by the amazing progress of the USC football team. To me and my infantry friends, my brother was the hero as USC beat Michigan State 21-17, then Stanford 30-0. There was no doubt they were headed to being number one in the nation, and Delta Company, 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry was firmly behind them. My infantry friends cared about USC because they cared about me, and they knew I cared about them. Of that, they had zero doubt. Most of the infantrymen assigned to our company had played football in pee-wee leagues or in high school or even college, so they understood the game. We all understood how difficult it was to make it on a college football team and how athletic you had to be to excel at that level. We understood the sacrifices of time and energy you had to make to train all year round and the incredible punishment your body would have to endure to make it through a season without being seriously injured. We talked about our football coaches, which of them had devised the most tortuous workouts for us. We talked about playing with injuries and walking it off. We talked about playing both ways, offense and defense, and having to be helped out of bed the day after a game because we were so beat up. We talked about the games we'd played against our most bitter rivals and the glory of days gone by when we had been named All-State, All-County, or All-League. And we talked about the girls we had wooed and invited to the homecoming prom because we were on the high school football team and everybody in town knew it and wanted to rub elbows with us. We spoke of the small town mothers and fathers who, with an overabundance of team spirit, had actually encouraged their daughters to go out with us. We talked about the good old days after a football game of getting lucky in the back seat of our old man's car and later sweating bullets until our blessed time of the month came around and we could continue the illusion of planning our lives until the draft caught up with us. On October 8, 1967, while we were in our night defensive position, we listened to KLIK, also called Radio Like, the Big Red One radio station, and we heard that USC had beaten Stanford on October 7th. The news went around the NDP like wildfire. Everyone was ecstatic. We started talking about USC's next opponent, Notre Dame. After we woke up on October 9th, 1967, the word was passed to all platoons that we were going on a search and destroy mission that day, so we should start getting saddled up as we would leave right after eating sea rations for breakfast. I was the radio transmitter operator for the 2nd Squad of the 2nd Platoon. I had finished eating and was getting my rucksack ready with an extra battery for the ANPRC 25 radio I carried. I stood by my equipment rack, facing our artillery forward observer, 2nd Lieutenant H., and his RTO, who were 10 meters from me. The FO took out his standard-issue Colt .45 caliber pistol. He jacked rounds into the chamber, ejecting them by hand. His RTO, PFC Doug Atwood of Utah, sat on an upside-down helmet in front of the FO, tightening straps on his own rucksack. "That's pretty fucking stupid," I said to my friend Joe Crutcher. I was just going to holler at the FO to stop what he was doing and to point the pistol towards the jungle when, pow, pistol went off. Time froze. I prayed no one had been hit. Oh, no, I said as I sprinted for the lieutenant. No such luck. The FO had shot Atwood in the stomach. No one moved. Slowly, the RTO keeled over and clutched his belly. I ran over to the FO, a fairly new 2nd lieutenant who had not been with us very long, and grabbed the pistol from his hand. He had a death grip on the pistol, and his face had gone completely ashen. He stared unblinking at the RTO and stuttered, "Nonsense." I told one of the other medics that the FO was in shock. He should treat him quickly. Doc Gomez rendered first aid for PFC Atwood, but there was nothing to be done. The .45 slug had torn a hole in Atwood's liver. The RTO died as the medics held his hand. I can still hear his last words. "I'm getting cold. I'm getting really cold." He looked pleadingly around. I wanted so very badly to comfort him, but he was gone before I had a chance. Within 20 minutes, the battalion commander ordered the FO back to Like. He was whisked off by a Huey along with PFC Atwood's body for the 15-minute flight. The whole battalion was in shock from the senseless killing, but we had to continue with our search and destroy mission as if nothing had happened. As we did so often in Vietnam, I just put it all to the side, focused on the task at hand, surviving. Some staff sergeant hollered, "Hey, get your shit on, move out." I yelled over to Crutcher. "Man, I pray we don't hit the shit today, brother, because with no fucking artillery support, it'll be time to fix bayonets." 2 hours later, we hit the shit when we ran into a company in North Vietnamese regular, and I was shot in the left shoulder. Doc Gomez earned his pay that day as he worked on me while we killed 18 North Vietnamese just 15 yards from us on our right flank. Firefight lasted half an hour. After the firefight was over, all of the wounded, myself included, and one dead soldier were loaded into a medevac helicopter and returned to Lai Khe. The doctors in the battalion aid station back in Lai Khe probed my wound for half an hour, trying to get the bullet and other fragments out of me because parts of the bullet had fragmented after hitting bone, and the copper jacket had unwound. When I say probe, I mean they shoved an ice-cold surgical steel bullet hook down inside my wound and poked and prodded with the tool at least 8 inches into my chest. Each time one of the doctors would take another turn at trying to get it out, I got nauseated again. There was no time for anesthesia as they went right to work. I finally asked if there was any alternative to the probing. I'd had enough. The doctor said they could send me to the 24th evac and I could get operated on, or they could just sew it up. I said, "Well, hell, sir, sew it up then." They put in 9 metal wire sutures to help close the gaping hole up. The reason the doctors couldn't get the bullet out was that it had split into 3 different fragments. It remains in my chest to this day. I was put on light duty back in the company area until the sutures were due to come out around the 24th of October. I still had my arm in a sling on October 15, 1967, when we found out that USC had beaten the Notre Dame Irishmen 24-7 on the 14th. Everyone in the rear company area in Lai Khe was happy and made sure we got the next day's Stars and Stripes out to the field so the whole company could celebrate the latest victory. I heard back from the field on the afternoon of the 16th that my whole platoon celebrated USC's victory over Notre Dame. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was easier to focus on the success of my brother's team than on the chaos immediately around me, which assaulted me and my comrades every day. SB4 Anderson's and PFC Atwood's deaths had bothered me a great deal. Atwood was a gentle soul who just wanted to do his job right and go home to Utah. Unfortunately, he was stuck with an idiot for a boss and went home the hard way. Anderson and I had served together in Bravo Company before we'd been transferred to Delta Company back in August. He was a good soldier, killed instantly on the 9th of October by the North Vietnamese as he walked point for his platoon. Whether or not anything could have turned out differently wasn't even considered at the time. It was always, move it, get your gear on, saddle up, we're moving out, make sure you have enough water, make sure you got enough ammo and hand grenades. There was no time to weep, to mourn, or to ponder all the imponderables about life, death, and the meaning of all the fucking cosmic suffering and injustice we witnessed all around us. No time for tears or even a little grieving for the great souls who had been killed. On October 17th, 1967, one of the biggest battles of the Vietnam War occurred. 62 soldiers from our battalion were killed in action that day. Just about everyone else from Alpha and Delta companies were wounded. 2 were missing in action and have never been found. All this crushing news was topped off by me and 2 of the survivors of the battle, PFC Dave Everman and PFC John Fowler, being ordered to go to graves registration in Lai Khe the day after the battle to make sure everybody got identified properly. We had to pull each soldier, our friends, out of a body bag and shine a flashlight in his face to see who it was. Protocol required at least 2 soldiers to identify the dead soldier. After that, everything became unimportant. I sank further into depression. The wire sutures in my shoulder fell out while I was showering one day. I had forgotten to go back to the aid station to get them removed. Within 3 weeks, it was my time to go home. USC won their next 3 games, but even that's a blur in my mind. I was still traumatized from losing so many of my friends. I barely remember processing through the 90th Replacement Detachment in Long Binh as we waited our turn to get on a big jet to fly home. On November 8, my turn came. and we took off in the middle of a mortar attack. Not a good omen. Arriving safely in California, we were spit on by hippies at San Francisco International Airport. I actually thought the bastards were there to welcome us and thank us for our service. Huh. Something was terribly wrong. I felt enraged and betrayed, but couldn't put any of it into words. Because I had less than 60 days until my normal release date from the Army, I was discharged. The honorable discharge date says November 8, 1967, the same date I left Vietnam. After flying home to Southern California, first thing I wanted to do was see my 4-year-old son. I had no interest in seeing his mother, who lived only 3 blocks from my parents' home. For the first couple of days, I didn't have a vehicle, so I walked everywhere. My ex-wife and her parents said I wasn't allowed to see my son yet, as they were thinking it over when the best time would be for a visit. Walking past my ex-wife's house, I saw my son in the doorway behind the screen door. Felt a great surge of love and hurried over to say hi. So happy to see him again. Moving to the front of the house, I could see that he was shaking all over, crying. Something must have been wrong with him. As I neared the door, I asked, "Hey, what's the matter, Mike? Why are you crying so much?" I opened the screen door to embrace him. He sobbed as he clung to my neck and wouldn't let go. I asked again, "What's the matter, son?" He said through his sobs, "Mama said you were dead. She said you were killed in Vietnam." I was astounded that my ex-wife would unleash so much hatred of me on our son. When I found her cowering in one of the front bedrooms, I asked her why she would do something so evil to our little boy, and she screamed, "Because I wanted you to be dead. I wished you were dead." I was speechless. The venom was tangible in every word. She compounded the insult by saying, "Your own mother said she wished you would die over there. If you don't believe me, just ask my mother." This is how it always was between my ex and me. The air we breathed became toxic if we lingered too long in each other's company. I was afraid I would become just like her if I stayed and argued any more. I picked up my son, hugged him to my chest. I told him gently, "Hey, listen, I'm too tough to die. Nobody can kill me." I wiped his tears from his face, kissed him on his rosy cheeks, told him I would come pick him up in a couple of days. We'd cook some tacos together. My son smiled. I set him down. I said to my ex-wife, "I'll pick him up day after tomorrow at noon. I'll bring him back around 7 p.m. By the way, while I'm here, you can give me all 12 of my savings bonds that were sent to you over the last year." My ex-wife said she didn't have them anymore. "What do you mean?" I demanded. She said she'd cashed every last one of the savings bonds and spent the money. She retreated to the corner of the bedroom as if she expected me to attack. "You mean to say that the $125 a month the Army sent you wasn't enough? You had to steal my $1,200 in bonds too? You know you could go to jail over this? Those bonds were pay in the event of death only bonds." She said that she knew, but once her friend at the local bank had helped her cash one of them, it was just too tempting to cash all of them. Shaking my head, I came to an instant realization. I can't believe you're the same person I met and fell in love with 7 years ago, Diane. You've changed so much. Not for the good. I headed for the front door to walk home. She trailed after me, saying, "Hey, you're not going to call the cops, are you?" I could barely get the words out, but I said, "I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll let you know." I turned to face her. "I'll be back in 2 days to pick up Mike. Don't mess it up." With a heaviness on my heart, I walked back to my parents' home. Next day, after managing to talk my dad into co-signing for a motorcycle, I spoke with my brother Rick, who was at his apartment up near USC. He was happy to hear I'd gotten home safely. He said he and a friend were throwing a party for the football team on November 15th before they were to play UCLA on the 18th at the Coliseum. Did I want to come up to it? He said all the guys wanted to meet me, and I said, okay, I'd be there. He told me what time, gave me directions, and I hung up. I had grand visions of telling them how much my whole company of infantry guys followed every USC game, right up to the day they were killed in the Battle of Ongtan on October 17, 1967. I wanted to tell the whole team that all my friends were USC fans. We were rooting for them whole season. I imagined myself explaining how the bitter experiences of Vietnam were diminished somehow by all of us knowing USC was kicking ass on the playing field. When I was getting used to driving my motorcycle, I'd run into some Hells Angels from the Westminster chapter. They wanted to know all about Vietnam. We shared a few beers. They invited me back to their shop to work on my motorcycle, make it even more powerful. They were the only ones who wanted to know about the firefights I had been in and how I'd been wounded. They cared. So I said I'd come back and visit them. I followed my brother's instructions to his place off La Cienega Boulevard in L.A. I wore my Army field jacket, had a six-pack of cold Coors under my jacket. I roared up to the front lawn of his house, parked the bike, banged on the door, carrying the six-pack. I was let into the house by one of the players. He hollered, "Hey, Rick, brother's here." Rick made his way to me from across the room. All my brothers call me Marty, have since childhood, so he yelled out, "Marty, you're here. Great. Hey, everybody, this is my brother. Just got back from Vietnam." The men closest to me started introducing themselves. Adrian Young, Tom Rossovich, big, tall Bill Heo, Ty Salness, who I had played against in high school back in 1962. My brother hugged me. Someone made their way through the crowd behind him. Out of the crowd stepped O.J. Simpson, pushing one of the other players to the side. He shook my hand and said, "Hi, Marty. I'm O.J. Simpson." He fixed his eyes on me and asked, "How does it feel to kill someone?" The room fell eerily quiet. I felt just like I was in a roller coaster that had just reached the top of the ride. The bottom fell out of the world as we plunged from 0 to 100 miles an hour. That falling sensation hit me in the gut. That was a totally fucked up question. It put me on the spot, forced me to talk about something I wasn't really ready to talk about. I was still trying to come to grips with the fact that all my friends had just been killed. But since everyone was listening for a response, I would give an honest answer. I drew a deep breath and said, "Killing someone else never makes you feel good. You always wonder if you couldn't have been friends with the person in different circumstances. I never wanted to kill anyone. They were shooting at me, and I had no choice." His eyes glazed over, and he immediately lost interest. He headed back to the other side of the room. I gave my brother the six-pack, took one of the beers out of it, popped the top. I fired up a cigarette. I told my brother, "Sorry, man, I can't stay here." "Good luck with UCLA, brother." I hollered over to everyone, "Nice meeting you." Fired up my motorcycle. I found the freeway again. And before I knew it, I was doing 100 miles an hour. Not even the Hells Angels had asked such an insensitive question. Anger sucked bile into the back of my mouth. Some people just have no fucking manners. Never have. Never will.
I'm joined by my friend David Aldrich, the author of OJ. David, that story is one long gut punch because it could be about OJ, obviously. It could be about the circumstances that you experienced in war beforehand. But when I'm done listening to that story, it occurs to me that that story is about coping. It's about the costs of coping with what happens at war, what happens at home. So much goes wrong, so much can hurt you. And there, in the middle of it all, is your brother, kicker for the 1967 #1 ranked USC Trojans. And over there, man, everybody's pulling for you. And there's this ray of light, yeah? And that gets taken away from you. Before we talk about Vietnam and your wife and OJ, I want to talk about you now because I know you and you've got 50 years of coping, 50 years of understanding. I want you to talk about a lifetime of having things ripped out of your hands and still getting up every day to do the job, to be a friend, to be a soldier, to be a husband, to be a father?
Well, I could only have dealt with all of it by learning to meditate.
Hmm.
The pain was so severe. At times it seemed unending. The situations I was in, the experiences I had that were just soul numbing. There was only one way to deal with all of that because Vietnam returnees, people who were in Vietnam, who experienced war, who've had to take somebody else's life, we didn't have a whole battalion of psychologists to talk to when we came back from Vietnam. And we didn't even have each other because the internet had not been invented at that time. We had ourselves.
And you didn't even have a supportive nation after a point. You made that point in this story, returning to San Francisco. You thought perhaps a hero's return, and that was taken from you.
We all felt, I think, betrayed a little by our homecoming. I found that even trying to talk with my own family, they didn't want to hear about Vietnam. It was just too much for them. The trauma of war seems to have reached every home in America, and nobody wanted to talk about it. So we didn't have that way to vent either. We didn't have each other. We only had ourselves, and that's sufficient if you realize where all of your power comes from in the first place, and you try to get back in touch with that power through meditation or maybe yoga. But I meditated, and that way I was able to maintain my own sanity. Well, sometimes not.
Hmm. Well, you felt like an outcast. You felt like an outcast to your wife at home.
Absolutely.
You felt like an outcast when you got off the plane in your country. You certainly did not feel welcome even in your brother's company of the football team. Yet you found solace in the company of other outcasts, the motorcycle gang, which I found particularly fascinating.
I was amazed also. I mean, I'm not a joiner. When they asked me to ride with them and become a Hell's Angel, I said, no thanks. I was very grateful for their camaraderie, and they always loved talking with me, and they wanted to support me and help me with my motorcycle.
You feel they understood your
Oh, yeah,
circumstances better
absolutely.
than your own mother or your
I
own
think
wife?
they did. And they were sensitive to the fact that I had been wounded, that I had to kill somebody a lot in Vietnam. They were very considerate of my fragile state, I think. That sounds odd, but those guys I met in Westminster were really great. I hope they're still alive. I hope they hear this podcast. I send them my blessings. I don't care what kind of life they've had. Everybody is redeemable.
Okay, that takes us right to OJ. Okay, everybody
I'm
is
sorry.
redeemable.
I'm sorry. Well, I loved OJ also. I was like the rest of the world. I thought he was a great athlete. I didn't know him as a person. I wanted to get to know him. My brother remained friends with OJ his whole life. My beloved brother passed away 2018, and he was still friends with OJ up to the day he died.
The obvious irony of that question, walking up to you, OJ Simpson, with the reputation that he has now, the irony of that question that struck you as so wrong. Walk us through that.
Well, first of all, I felt it was very insensitive to just blatantly ask somebody, what's it feel like to kill somebody? That seemed to be just callous. I don't think he really gave a damn about me as a human being. He wanted to know about the whatever emotions you go through when you take somebody else's life, and I just didn't appreciate that at all. Not at that time in my life. I had just lost all my friends, my whole platoon was wiped out. My company was non-combat ready for over 2 months. And of course, going to Graves registration and having to identify everybody made it even worse for me personally. Every time I closed my eyes to go to sleep, I saw their faces, having pulled everybody out of the body bags to try to identify them. I hadn't left Vietnam completely by going back to the States. It was in my heart, it was on my mind. After all those experiences, I really did need to meditate to try to figure out why. Why everything? Why did all my friends get killed? Why did OJ act like such an ass? And I understand somebody said he was diagnosed with cancer lately, and I send him my blessings. I don't hold any grudges about that. He's still a fellow human being, but
Looking back, the irony's pretty thick.
yes, it is. After his wife and Ron Goldman were killed, I called my brother Rick and I asked him, say, Rick, remember when you had that party and OJ asked me, and he said, yeah, I remember, I know, but he's still my friend.
Your answer to OJ, that in other circumstances we might have been friends.
You realize that you could have been, perhaps, friends with somebody you just killed. You realize that. A lot of soul searching goes on with people who have taken somebody else's life. A lot of policemen, after they've had to kill somebody in the line of duty, they resign their position because they don't ever want to do that again. Well, in combat, you have no choice. You have to do it again and again and again. And it can be overwhelming, not only to you as a human being, but in your soul. It can just crush your soul to be doing that sort of job.
Last question. How did you keep your soul from being crushed in the last several decades? Yes, meditating. Yes, you have a wonderful wife who's a dear friend to me as well, Sheila. And I know that you've read and followed the Course in Miracles. But deep inside, so many veterans struggle with PTSD today and have in every war. Your path to forgiveness has been primarily powered by what, do you think?
It's good you mentioned path, because my path, as I think everybody is called to, was to remember my connection with God. All roads lead to God, back to your Creator. And I hope that if anybody's listening to this who's in doubt, please put your doubts to rest. There is a Creator, and you too can find your way back to Him.
And in case you don't, you've been here before, right?
Yeah. You can do it the next time
You can
around.
get
Yeah.
it the next time.
But I really think whatever form you think God is, search for Him and you'll find Him.
He'll find you.
That's right.
What is that old saying? You might not believe in God, but He believes in you.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well,
Always a
thank you.
pleasure, brother.
Well, God bless you, brother.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
you.
The Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans and their families, offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen, or just send us your thoughts, email us at mpodcast@vawarmemorial.org, or use the link in the podcast description. If you're a veteran or a family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America, and you want to learn how to best tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's pieces and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Music for this episode was provided by Jackson Albrecht. Lastly, If you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen Podcast. It's an honor.